from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: 10 people have been killed and more than 900 injured after Taiwan's strongest earthquake in 25 years. Our other headlines: a grave mistake. The Israeli military responds to growing condemnation over the killing of international aid workers in Gaza. NATO looks to future-proof its support for Ukraine with less reliance on the United States under a possible Trump administration. And Greece chokes in clouds of thick dust from the Sahara as the country experiences unseasonably hot weather. At least 10 people have been killed and more than 900 are injured after the strongest earthquake in 25 years in Taiwan. The 7.2 magnitude quake damaged buildings and caused landslides. Our correspondent Jen Copestake reports.
Rescuers entering a collapsed building in the city of Hualien near the epicenter of the earthquake. Just after 7:30 a.m. local time, the 7.2 magnitude quake hit with a reported depth of 15.5 kilometers. Children were evacuated from schools. One woman escaped a building with a small child in her arms. Many buildings collapsed on busy streets. The earthquake was felt as far away as southeast China. Dramatic videos showed water from a rooftop pool cascading down a building in Taipei.
It was shaking very violently. All the motorcycles outside our house toppled over, so I quickly switched off the gas and the electrical source and opened the main door.
Maybe an earthquake hasn't happened in a long time, so it felt really terrifying.
The earthquake also caused huge landslides, with emergency services working to clear rock slides from mountain roads. At a collapsed printing factory in Taipei, 57 people were rescued, many saying how lucky they were to escape. Rescue efforts are continuing, but many people are still missing, including reports of dozens trapped in tunnels. Jen Copestake, CGTN.
World leaders continue to demand answers after 7 charity workers were killed in an Israeli strike in Gaza. Israel's military stands accused of deliberately targeting charity staff, but the head of the IDF says the strike was a grave mistake that occurred in complex circumstances. US President Joe Biden says he's outraged and heartbroken by the attack, echoing global calls for a swift investigation.
The dreadful events of the last 2 days are a moment when we should mourn the loss of these brave humanitarian workers, including the 3 British citizens that tragically were killed. We should also send our condolences to their families, and our thoughts should be with them. I welcome what the Israeli Foreign Minister said yesterday to me about a full, urgent and transparent inquiry into how this dreadful event was allowed to happen, and we want to see that happen very, very quickly.
I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning with a phone call that was organised overnight. I expressed Australia's anger and concern at the death of Zomi Frankom. This is completely unacceptable. The Israeli government has accepted responsibility for this, and Prime Minister Netanyahu conveyed his condolences.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv. For Alex, the Israeli military responding to criticism over the strike on the aid convoy. What have we heard?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jamie. We've heard some level of contrition, of regret, of apology, clearly saying that this should not have happened. And we've heard this initially from Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, but more recently from Herzl Halevi. He is the head of the Israeli Defense Forces, the chief of the General Staff, and he posted a clip about this strike just a few hours ago.
I want to be very clear. The strike was not carried out with the intention of harming WCK aid workers. It was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in a very complex conditions. It shouldn't have happened. We are sorry for the unintentional harm to the members of WCK. We share in the grief of their families as well as the entire World Central Kitchen organization from the bottom of our hearts.
Well, the Chief of General Staff also promised a rapid, transparent, full investigation into what happened, which he said would conclude in a matter of days. And we know there is a lot of pressure on Israel to provide answers to exactly what happened. We understand from reporting in Israeli media that 3 vehicles were struck in succession, not immediately one after the other. We understand that aid workers tried to escape from the first vehicle after it was struck to seek refuge in the second. When that was hit, the third car tried to provide aid to those who were hit in the second vehicle. That third car was struck as well. And we know that strikes against sensitive targets like vehicles from aid agencies have to be approved by very senior commanders in the Israeli Defense Forces. So clearly that investigation is going to need to provide answers as quickly as possible, Jamie.
Alex, we've seen another night of protest in Jerusalem. What happened there?
Yeah, we've seen what is being described by Israeli media as chaos, where anti-government protesters and the families of those hostages went around police barricades, divided into several groups, trying to get to Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence. We know he is recovering from his hernia surgery and currently working from home. And we know, again, from the security agency Shin Bet, warning the families of the hostages not to engage in that kind of protesting, or else it may lead to clashes with law enforcement, and that it would bring Israel down a very dangerous path. So clearly tensions rising, pressure building on the Netanyahu government to reach a deal. We've also seen the families of the hostages interrupting a session of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, painting their hands in yellow, demanding a ceasefire deal is reached as quickly as possible. We know the negotiations are ongoing. Israel has put a counter-proposal forward that is now going to be communicated to Hamas, but clearly that process not working nearly quickly enough from the families of those hostages being held in terrible conditions in Gaza.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv. The United Nations World Food Programme says malnutrition among children in Gaza is now spreading at a record pace. Let's talk to our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in the city of Rafah. Akram, tell us more about the impact of the latest aid restrictions.
Well, the impact is just pushing further the misery the Palestinians have been living, depriving them from accessing the food that they were provided and leading them to death by the blockade, by the deprivation, by the starvation, and by the ongoing bombardment. The World Central Kitchen has provided in 175 days 42 million meals for the hungry Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They were providing around 240,000 meals to the Gazans in 86 community kitchens throughout the Gaza Strip. They provided, even in coordination and cooperation with the Jordanian Royal Force, around 32,000 meals for Gazans who never accessed such meals before. They were coordinating actively, and they were reaching out for the people of Gaza and extending the food to them, helping them survive and helping them overcome some of the dire repercussions of the malnutrition that befell them and befell their children. You should imagine how is it like now when this World Central Kitchen is affected, when the INGOs are not allowed to operate in Gaza, such as the UNRWA, when the World Food Programme is also halting all its activities in the Gaza North because of the chaos caused by the ongoing bombardment. So the situation is dire and is ever deteriorating because the ongoing strategy Israel has been following when it comes to the aid convoys, when it comes to the international organizations trying to help the Palestinians, when it comes also to local efforts to organize a smooth flow of the aid to the people of Gaza. So catastrophic situation that is getting more catastrophic, more people are affected, and more people are likely to die because of that ongoing deprivation.
Akram, we're seeing reports of an Israeli attack in the city of Khan Yunis. What more do we know?
As a matter of fact, the situation in Khan Yunis is still extremely dire. The very heavy bombardment could be heard from Rafah. I was listening to the sound of the explosions rocking the houses inside Rafah, shaking the houses, ripping the silence, and the news coming from Khan Yunis are indicating that there is a destruction of full residential blocks in the very east of Khan Yunis, in Qudayh neighborhood, in Abasan, which is in the very east of Khan Yunis. There is also some heavy destruction in Khan Yunis refugee camp and Khan Yunis southern area. So the clashes are still continuous. The fire exchange is still very heavy and at a peak, and also the destruction of the residential homes, of residential areas, buildings and homes is still ongoing in Khan Yunis area. No news about specific number of fatalities of people injured, but we're still waiting to hear those news, because normally when there is such a heavy fire, such a heavy bombardment, there is also such a heavy number of people killed and injured because of that.
Akram, thank you for that. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in Rafah. The United States has warned Iran against retaliating following the attack on its embassy in Syria. The US told the United Nations Security Council it had no prior warning of the strike that Iran has blamed on Israel. Tehran says it reserves the right to take what it called a decisive response after 2 of its generals and 5 military advisors were killed. China's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations condemned the airstrike, saying it's a serious violation of the UN Charter and international law.
去年10月加沙冲突爆发以来，
Since the latest round of conflict broke out in the Gaza Strip last October, we have witnessed countless attacks on houses, schools, hospitals, humanitarian facilities and UN agencies. Today we have witnessed attacks on diplomatic institutions. The red line of international law and the basic norms of international relations have been broken again and again, and the bottom line of moral conscience has also been repeatedly broken. This tragic situation must be ended immediately.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, sustainable shoes from the sea. How a scientist is turning to ocean plants in a bid to outrun plastic pollution.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. 10 people have been killed and more than 900 injured after Taiwan's strongest earthquake in 25 years. Our other headlines, a grave mistake. The Israeli military responds to growing condemnation over the killing of international aid workers in Gaza. NATO wants to guarantee long-term funding for Ukraine before the potential arrival of Donald Trump in the White House. Foreign ministers are discussing a 5-year support plan worth $107 billion. Concerns are growing that the former US president will stop aid to Kyiv if he returns to office. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Beaver, who's watching events for us in Brussels. John, so what is the plan here, and is it likely to be accepted, adopted?
Well, as you say, this plan is all about trying to guarantee long-term funding for Ukraine from NATO. So the kind of numbers being talked about today is just over $100 billion over 5 years. In terms of whether it's going to be adopted, this meeting really is a precursor to the main event, the Leaders' Summit that's taking place in Washington, D.C. in July. So you would imagine there will be a huge amount of behind-the-scenes negotiations and trying to iron out details between now and then. So we have the foreign ministers here at NATO headquarters at the moment. We also have the foreign minister from Sweden here as well. The first time there has been a major meeting since they were incorporated into NATO last month, this newly expanded NATO. But yes, it's all about this long-term funding and these concerns about the US and whether they will withdraw some support. So we also have NATO trying to control the actual mechanism when it comes to passing on that funding to Ukraine as well. Obviously deeply concerned about what might happen if Donald Trump comes into the White House, as you say. And earlier, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was very keen to point out just how important the US is to NATO.
The United States is the biggest ally and is providing the most military support. And the fact that there has been no agreement in the US Congress on a supplemental or continued this support has consequences.
John, how much concern is there about what an incoming President Trump might do if he wins the US election?
Well, I think there is a lot of concern because of the sort of rhetoric that the former president and perhaps the future president, Donald Trump, what he's been saying about NATO, whether it's down to the funding. Of course, the guidelines here, the target is that NATO members spend 2% of their GDP on defence. NATO, of course, doesn't have its own military. It is completely reliant on its members in order to provide that defence for other members. And of course, worst case scenario with the US withdrawing from NATO, which is not being talked about at the moment, but NATO members previously have said that would put the entire organisation in jeopardy. So, of course, there is deep concern about that. And when you have a man like Donald Trump, who is very quick to come up with very bold opinions, when you have a man like that potentially about to retake the White House, then, of course, we have these very large international agencies. They keep a close eye on that, and they're concerned about what might happen in the future. The NATO Secretary General as well, also keen to point out, of course, that it would be the impact it has on Ukraine as well, and how more weapons and more funding is needed, especially as we see an expected Russian offensive in the coming months as well.
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Beaver in Brussels. Well, Moscow has responded to this plan, accusing NATO of returning to a Cold War mentality and saying there's no room for the alliance in a modern multipolar world.
NATO's own documents proclaim our country to be its most significant direct threat. There is an active military build-up on NATO's eastern flank. Military drills, unprecedented in size, simulating conflict against Russia, are conducted. They don't even try to hide it.
The DPRK has successfully test-fired a new hypersonic ballistic missile as the country vows to further strengthen its military arsenal. Pyongyang claims it's capable of using solid fuel to power missiles of all ranges. The country's leader, Kim Jong-un, says the move is a demonstration of the superiority of DPRK's defense technology. This comes as tensions on the Korean peninsula deepen in the last few months. Mexico's president has offered condolences to the family of a mayoral candidate who was shot dead on Monday. The shooting took place during an event on the first day of the candidate's campaign. There's been a string of violent attacks against political candidates ahead of Mexico's general elections in June. The former Spanish Football Federation president, Luis Rubiales, has been arrested in a corruption investigation. He was released soon after being detained on arrival at Madrid airport. Rubiales denies any wrongdoing. Separately, he's due to go on trial for sexual assault relating to kissing the player Jenny Hermoso on the lips after the Spain women's team won the World Cup final, something he says was consensual. Botswana's president has threatened to send 20,000 elephants to Germany in a dispute over conservation. The African leader says Berlin should try living with the elephants to experience the challenges his country faces. Earlier this year, Germany suggested there should be tougher rules against importing hunting trophies, a move that Botswana says risks impoverishing its people. Botswana is home to over 130,000 elephants, about a third of the world's total. Dust from the Sahara Desert has shrouded parts of Greece, whipped up by strong winds. It's not a new phenomenon, but this time it's got the scientists worried because it coincides with unusually high temperatures. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports.
It should be a sunny day in Athens. It's hot and the skies are blue. But there's a fog hanging over the capital. Thick clouds of Saharan dust have blown in from North Africa, making breathing difficult for many people.
The combination of Saharan dust, high temperatures, and the little particles in the air that cause allergies during the spring lead many that suffer from bronchial asthma to exacerbate their condition, and in many cases force them to be hospitalized.
It's not only those with existing breathing conditions that should be concerned. There are warnings for the wider public and a return of some familiar advice.
Most of the population is advised to avoid unnecessary travel. If they have to go out, they are highly recommended to wear KN95 protective masks, as we did during the pandemic.
Much of Greece has turned into various shades of yellow over the past few days, creating a yellow cloud covering most of the major cities. But it's not only the Saharan dust that is abnormal for this time. Temperatures are unusually high, with the thermometer in some areas showing 30 degrees Celsius, bringing headaches to scientists about what could follow.
It's difficult to know what the summer would look like, as we still have 3 months ahead of us. However, if we take into consideration climate change indicators, temperatures will be higher than usual, especially in the southeast Mediterranean area. From now on, we will experience more intense heat waves, including this summer. I wish my predictions would be off, but according to my data, it does not seem like it.
While the dust is expected to recede and the temperatures are set to drop over the coming days, there are warnings for more hot weather ahead. Last year was the warmest on record, and with temperatures already in the 30s, scientists worry that we could be in for another record-breaking summer. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
Now, clearing the oceans of plastic has put a spring in the step of a scientist from California. The university professor is turning to algae to create biodegradable shoes as an alternative to those made from harmful plastics. Our correspondent Francis Kuo reports.
Stephen Mayfield is a true Californian through and through.
I grew up on the water here. I grew up on the water up in Los Angeles and have spent my entire life here. I am a surfer, I'm a fisherman, I'm a scuba diver. I love all of those things.
That love of the water is driving his passion to save it.
Like everyone else, I've seen what we've done to the ocean. We've used it as a dumping ground for the last, hundreds of years, but specifically for the last 50 years. You know, it's just a garbage bin that we throw stuff into. Sustainability.
So Mayfield turned to a potential solution in his lab at the University of California, San Diego. The answer lying in algae.
They were the original organisms. You would not be on this planet, and I would not be on this planet if it weren't for those.
They clearly spent a fair amount of time.
Mayfield is a distinguished professor of biology and has studied green algae for decades. The organism's a powerhouse against climate change by sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
About 3 billion years ago, the atmosphere was about close to 80% carbon dioxide. No organisms could live on it. Photosynthetic organisms showed up, figured out how to turn CO2 and sunlight into chemical energy. So it turned the atmosphere from 80% carbon dioxide to now 20% oxygen. And that's why you and I can live and breathe.
Now, Mayfield's scientific senses have given algae a modern purpose as a main material for shoes.
And shoes have that kind of nice sweet spot where they're large volume of them, because there's about 25 billion with a B, right? There's only 8 billion of us on the planet. Somehow we make 3 pairs of shoes per person per year.
Through his company, Blueview, Mayfield created what he calls the world's first fully biodegradable shoes, from top to bottom. Algae is grown in Mayfield's lab. Their oils extracted and used as a basis to mold the shoe's soles. The upper half woven with all natural ingredients of hemp, cotton, and eucalyptus. Altogether, the shoe is a plant-based alternative to conventional footwear, which is often made of harmful plastics that linger in the environment.
Because they stay around for 1,000 years, hey, when you throw those there, they tend to stay there forever.
Not these shoes. Here's what they look like breaking down inside these compost containers.
It takes between 7 and 8 months for our shoe to completely biodegrade.
During his 6 years of research, Mayfield and his team found when the shoes were tossed in the ocean, organisms fed off of them, recycling the algae back into the ecosystem. Mayfield's invention now creating a footprint, helping protect his beloved oceans for years to come. Frances Coe, CGTN, San Diego.
One of the oldest books is due to go up for auction in London this summer. Written in the 3rd century, the Crosby-Shawin Codex dates from the time when papyrus scrolls were replaced by single sheets. It was the work of a scribe in an Egyptian Christian monastery and contains the earliest known text of 2 books of the Bible. Discovered in the 1950s, the manuscript is expected to fetch between $2.5 to $4 million. The headlines again. 10 people have been killed and more than 900 injured after Taiwan's strongest earthquake in 25 years. Our other headlines, a grave mistake. The Israeli military responds to growing condemnation over the killing of international aid workers in Gaza. And NATO looks to future-proof its support for Ukraine with less reliance on the United States under a possible Trump administration. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.